Despite the geographical isolation and cultural distinctiveness of Native American tribes from the Western world, many of their customs and views on relationships shared striking similarities with those of other societies. However, these practices were always shaped by the unique social, spiritual, and environmental context of each tribe. In some Native American cultures, intimate relationships were deeply intertwined with religious beliefs, while in others, they were governed by communal duties or practical concerns. Through the rituals and traditions that govern relationships, we gain insight into the importance of intimacy as something beyond a personal bond. It was often an expression of tribal identity, a means to spiritual well-being, or even a communal asset. Cultural perspectives on intimacy and marital relations among the diverse Native American tribes. The relationships between men and women were understood through distinct cultural lenses. In some societies, relationships were strictly regulated by taboos and prohibitions, while others emphasized personal choice and communal connections. For example, the Apache had strong beliefs regarding the timing of intimate interactions, particularly during the agave harvest. They believed that engaging in intimacy at this time would adversely affect the fruit, rendering it tasteless and inedible. This practice illustrates how daily activities were, often linked to broader spiritual beliefs. In Native A, in contrast, the Comanche had a different approach, particularly concerning intimacy before significant events like battles or journeys. Rather than refraining from physical closeness to conserve strength, they leaned into it, spending time with their partners to bolster morale. This practice reveals an intriguing view of intimacy, not only as a personal experience, but also as a source of emotional fortitude. For the Comanche, the act of being close to a loved one was seen as reinforcing bravery and commitment as warriors. Blending personal needs with the variations among tribes were vast. While some viewed intimacy primarily as a means of reproduction, others considered it as a way for men to fulfill personal desires, often without taking into account the needs or desires of women. This distinction highlights a gender imbalance, reflecting the power dynamics and societal expectations within each tribe. It underscores how gender roles shaped not just daily life, but also the intimate relationships between individuals. The role of spiritual and ritual significance in intimacy. For some tribes, intimacy was not only a personal matter, but also deeply rooted in spiritual and ritualistic significance. The Mandan, for instance, practiced a ceremony known as the inviting the buffalo, where young women dressed in animal skins would bring food to the elders' tent as part of a ceremonial gathering. This act was far more than a gesture of hospitality. It held symbolic weight, honoring the continuity between past and future generations. After the elders had eaten, the young women would escort them into the forest, where the elders performed rituals to ensure a successful hunting season. In this context, intimacy was intertwined with spirituality and survival, seen as a communal responsibility tied to prosperity. Interestingly, not all tribes required physical interaction for such rituals. In cases where elders were physically unable to participate, they instead engaged in prayers for a prosperous hunt. This flexibility highlights the adaptability of tribal customs, demonstrating that spiritual and practical needs often took precedence over physical acts. For the Mandan, intimacy with spiritual undertones reinforced a deep connection between humans and the natural world, aligning human reproduction with the abundance of wildlife. Another tribe with a distinct approach to ritualized intimacy was the Ojibwe. In their society, shamans held powerful roles, at times manipulating spiritual beliefs for personal gain. In one troubling practice, shamans would warn certain women of an impending spiritual visit, claiming that a powerful spirit would enter another person's body to engage with them. This warning often caused fear, leaving the women vulnerable to the shaman, who would then impersonate the spirit. This practice reveals a darker side of spiritual customs, where trust in religious figures could be exploited for personal control. For the Ojibwe, the position of the shaman was so revered that challenging their actions could be seen as sacrilegious, creating a complex and difficult social dynamic for women who were involved. This veneration of the shaman often placed women in a vulnerable position, where the boundaries between spiritual manipulation and personal autonomy became blurred, making it difficult for them to contest or escape these abuses of power. Punishments for violating intimacy norms among Native American tribes. Violations related to intimate relationships were met with serious consequences, often reflective of each tribe's core values. Crimes like rape were considered some of the most severe offenses. In many tribes, the punishment for such acts could be as extreme as death. However, the small, close-knit nature of these communities sometimes led to an alternative form of justice: compensation. Victims or their families would sometimes accept material compensation in place of harsher punitive measures. While this might seem lenient by modern standards, the payments could be substantial by tribal standards, suggesting that material restitution carried significant weight in the tribe's legal system. Each tribe handled such violations in unique ways. The Apache, for instance, allowed men to marry women they had previously forced into intimacy, but only if both families consented. Although unsettling by contemporary perspectives, this system was intended to resolve conflicts and restore familial harmony. In contrast, the Zuni took a different approach, holding public trials for instances of abuse. The victim would announce the punishment for the accused in front of the community, making the process of justice a public matter and involving everyone in the healing process. This communal involvement helped ensure accountability and collective healing. Perhaps the most complex and troubling practices were found among the Ojibwe. In some cases, the shaman himself would act as the perpetrator in instances where he had previously warned a woman of a spiritual visitation. This manipulation of spiritual beliefs, using fear to control or coerce women, illustrates a challenging dynamic within the tribe. Although shamans were revered figures, their power could be exploited without recourse, demonstrating a darker side to the tribe's social structure, where belief in the supernatural took precedence over the protection of individual autonomy. Traditions resembling prostitution or communal sexual norms. The concept of prostitution, as it is understood in Western societies, did not traditionally exist in Native American cultures. However, certain customs resembled aspects of prostitution in terms of the exchange of sexual favors. For instance, among the Creek people, women, particularly those who were married, had the cultural freedom to offer themselves to visitors if they chose. This practice, although voluntary, allowed women a degree of autonomy over their bodies that was unusual in many other societies. Married women, in particular, maintained the right to engage in these practices, reflecting a balance between personal freedom and respect for community norms. A similar practice existed among the Salish tribe, where both single and married women were sometimes assigned temporary partners by tribal elders. This custom was viewed as a communal duty, aimed at strengthening the connection between visitors and the tribe. In this case, intimacy was not about individual choice so much as fulfilling a cultural role, suggesting that, in some tribes, personal autonomy in relationships was secondary to the tribe's broader needs. The Papago tribe had a tradition during festivals where young women could form temporary unions with partners of their choosing. Adorned with body art and corn leaves, these women would participate in ceremonial dances, and men could pursue relationships with them for the duration of the festival. If these unions resulted in children, they were fully accepted into the tribe, demonstrating the Papago's flexibility in family structures. These temporary unions, although brief, could sometimes evolve into lasting marriages, blurring the line between short-term intimacy and long-term commitment. Marital infidelity, cultural perceptions, and punishments. While many Native American tribes had relatively flexible norms regarding intimacy, most placed a strong emphasis on marital loyalty and fidelity, particularly for women. In many tribes, husbands would pay a significant price to a woman's family before marriage, symbolizing an investment in her loyalty and commitment. As a result, a woman who committed adultery was seen as betraying not only her husband, but also her family and her tribe. In some cultures, such as the Comanche, a woman caught in infidelity could face extreme punishment, including exile, servitude, or even being left in the wilderness as prey for wild animals. This harsh treatment reflects the deep intertwining of loyalty with a woman's value within her community. Although infidelity among men was also discouraged, the consequences were typically less severe. When a man was caught having an affair, his wife might seek revenge, but the actions generally stayed within cultural boundaries. This difference in the severity of punishment for men and women highlights the gendered expectations that existed in many Native American societies, where women were often held to stricter standards of fidelity and loyalty. In the Shoshone tribe, for example, women who suspected their husbands of infidelity were known to confront rivals publicly, often resorting to insults or even throwing mud as an act of contempt. This public shaming served as both a punishment for the rival woman and a cathartic release for the wife. However, if the wife's anger led to violence and she killed her unfaithful husband, her actions were generally met with community disapproval, resulting in her social isolation and a loss of support from the tribe. In other tribes, women who suspected their husbands of infidelity sometimes took bold, dramatic actions to discourage rivals, with such confrontations being viewed as acceptable by the community. These actions were seen as a way to preserve marital harmony without involving tribal leaders, suggesting a more pragmatic approach to resolving domestic issues. Interestingly, some tribes, such as the Hopi, had exceptions to the norm, allowing men to have a private wife in addition to their legal spouse. This practice reflects a double standard in the social structure, where men's extramarital relationships were more tolerated or even institutionalized, further emphasizing gendered expectations within Native American communities. The cultural impact of marriage as a transactional bond in many Native American tribes. Marriage was less about romantic love and more about forging alliances and ensuring social stability. Marriage was often considered a transactional bond, with the groom offering gifts to the bride's family as a symbol of respect and a formalized expression of his intentions. This tradition underscored the idea that a woman was, in part, an investment, binding her husband to her family in a way that transcended personal emotions. The transactional nature of marriage was a mechanism for strengthening familial ties, as disputes or grievances between families could be resolved through the marriage connection. For example, in the Omaha tribe, if a groom had disrespected his bride's family or harmed one of its members, the bride's family could request compensation from him. This ensured that the marriage process was governed by mutual respect and propriety, fostering a sense of accountability within the familial network. However, this system could also lead to complex power dynamics, where women found themselves bound to their husband's family with limited agency to dissolve the marriage, particularly when material benefits or social standing were tied to the union. Conclusion: a complex cultural tapestry of intimacy and relationships through the diverse customs and social norms of Native American tribes. We see that intimacy, marriage, and relationships played deeply nuanced roles in the social fabric. Far from being merely private matters, these relationships were integral to spiritual expression, communal stability, and social justice. The severe penalties for violating intimacy norms reflect the immense value that tribes placed on honor and respect, not just between individuals, but also among extended families and the community as a whole. These tribal practices reveal striking contrasts and surprising parallels with other cultures around the world, highlighting universal themes of loyalty, gender roles, and community cohesion. The intimate bonds formed within these tribes often carried more weight than simple affection. They were expressions of the values and beliefs that defined each tribe's identity. In a world where survival depended on unity and mutual respect, intimacy within Native American tribes was as much about the welfare of the community as it was about personal connection.